Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Friedman. I'm the director of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation and the Cape Town Holocaust Center. And we have had the privilege of bringing from the United States the exhibition, which I think most of you have seen, called Deadly Medicine: Creating the Master Race. But an exhibition on its own is worth absolutely nothing, because it's the people that interact with the exhibition which make it worthwhile. And the reason why we brought this exhibition to South Africa was we thought that it had an important message for all of us in South Africa at this point. The first of the panels in this series dealt largely with the Isidimeni crisis and what had happened there. And it wasn't only that which made me really want to bring this exhibition, because in fact it was in the planning for some years, but the fact that we really need to look at the humanity of all of us. And that's something which I think in the anger of the moment and the hurt of the moment often gets swept under the table. It's the relevance of the activities around the exhibition which really make it have its say. And we've been very, very fortunate to have had, first of all, a wonderful project coordinator in Karen Miller, who's been able to liaise with the academics and many, many other role players in making it possible for the program to not only appear at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, but also at this university, and we'll be going up to Johannesburg, to the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, from there to Pretoria University, from there to Durban, from Durban back to Cape Town, and then to Namibia over a period of some 18 months. The ancillary program, as I've said, is really what makes the exhibition. And one of our most wonderful partners has been Professor Leslie Swartz, because when we first had a meeting with him and he understood the nature of what the message of the exhibition was, he said, this is really going to be a very, very useful tool for me, and to be able to put as the backdrop to seminars of this nature and other programs, particularly with a focus on disability. So we're really grateful to him, and we would like to acknowledge him here. But as always, the people that really make it possible in the end are the people that hold the purse strings. And so we have been very, very blessed that the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, represented here today by Christina Teichmann, they saw within this program the merit of it and their willingness to support it and make it all possible for us to hold these seminars is really, we're enormously grateful. We have a long history with them. They've supported many, many programs, from xenophobia to advocacy for democracy, working with young people, and now this as well. And I think it's testimony to the foundation that they see the possibility of impacting society through programs such as these. So thank you very much, and I invite you to say a few words. Yes, I should have done that in the first place, and that is to ask if anybody needs a sign interpreter.
Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. My name is Christina Teichmann. I'm project manager at the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation's office here in Cape Town. And it's a pleasure, as always, to have great partners, and today we're partnering with the Holocaust Center as well as with the University of Stellenbosch. It's a second seminar in a series. The first seminar, as Richard already pointed out, dealt mainly with the Isidimeni tragedy and the lessons we have learned from that tragedy. Today's seminar is actually has a different focus. It focuses on the nexus of disability, personhood, and participation. And as a Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, as a German political foundation, we're obviously very much interested in the topic of political participation. For example, the question, is it possible for people with disability to fully enjoy political participation, or are there challenges like access to polling station, or getting to cast the vote or something like that? But obviously, participation has different aspects. Political participation is one of them, but also social participation and obviously economic participation is quite important. And today we would like to unpack this issue of disability, personhood, and participation. So I'm very happy that we take up this topic, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. And I'm very much looking forward to our speakers today. Charlie, I have met a year ago at one of our youth functions. It was very inspiring, and I'm looking very much forward to your contribution. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Welcome everyone. I'm Leslie Swartz, and I work here in the psychology department at Stellenbosch University, and I'm so relieved that there are more than 3 people here today. So for all there are three people I don't care about, but the rest of you, thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to work with the Holocaust. Richard's already gone. He had unfortunately to go to another meeting. Karen in particular, and thank you very much indeed for the support from the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. And we've really been able to piggyback on something which is very important for all people who are serious about citizenship, democracy, human rights in our country, but globally as well. And these are all issues which are actually under threat. Suddenly it's okay to be racist, sexist, disabled, all sorts of things, as I'm sure I don't have to tell you. And as I said last time, for those of you who are here, I've been incredibly lucky in putting these panels together, because I had in mind for both panels particular people who I wanted to talk, and I had my first line, and I approached my first line of speakers, and they all said yes. So I didn't have to go to the second line, the third line. And I'm absolutely delighted with the panel that we have today. It's quite diverse, and I think it'll probably be best, I'll just give you an idea of how it's going to work. Each of the panelists is going to talk for about 20 minutes or so. Judy McKenzie, Professor Judy McKenzie from UCT will start, then Kaylee Michael from the Kaylee campaign, then Bongani Mapumula from Dismarties, which is the Disabled Students Association at our university, and finally Dr. Brian Watermayer from UCT. I'll introduce each of them in more detail if you want to come up. If you're anything like me, you'll have forgotten by the time they talk.
Leslie, can I just interrupt you? I think there are programs. I'm not sure if anybody would like one. Would you just raise your hand if you want one? Anybody else? There are more. Are there? Okay.
The most beautiful programs. I don't know who did the design for you, but this is all down to Karen. So these works of art which should later be framed, and I imagine them being sold in some sort of art exhibition.
Very expensive, yeah.
Just before we start with our speakers, I also want to mention just some of our other partners. I'd particularly like to thank Annalisa de Vet and her team from our department who've made everything happen. Anybody who works with me, Bongani was laughing at me, knows that I'm not a calm person. And all of you have done a lot to make it. No respect, I tell you, no respect. I was phoning him when he was on the lift here saying, are you here, where are you? And so on. But thank you very much, particularly to Annalisa and her team, Lily and Richard and various other people. The Transformation Office of the University has supported us. They see this is quite important for what we're trying to do, particularly in the 100th year of the university Museum. Our department, together Department of Psychiatry and Mental Health, are part of the Flisher Center for Public Mental Health, and we're also part of Mental Health Information Network Africa. Thank you very much to Maki and Asanda and Margie and your team for making sure this is all being podcast, so you're all going to be famous. I'm waiting. And this is being live streamed on Facebook, which I find terrifying as an idea. So as we speak, various people from all over the world are watching and listening, and no pressure. But thank you very much. I don't know who I've forgotten. I'm sure I've forgotten some other people. The United States Holocaust Museum, where I saw this exhibition originally in Washington, in DC, and I was amazed to find out by posting the invitation to this talk on a group on Facebook called Teaching Disability Studies that as we speak, this exhibition is also in Michigan, and we've been having quite an interesting discussion. They've been linking the exhibition to their issues around slavery and exclusion and so on, just as we've been linking it to issues here. So the first of our speakers is Professor Judith McKenzie, who is the head of the Disability Studies Division at the University of Cape Town, which is part of the Department of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. And I've asked Judy to do one of the most difficult jobs, which is to link the two talks, because Judy's been very involved with some of the other people, including Charlotte, who's kindly back again, who spoke last time around the Esidimeni issue, and is really one of the foremost people working on issues of rights for people with intellectual disability in South Africa. So over to you, Judy.
I'm just walking out now that I'm You're cute to me. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak tonight, and it really is a privilege and an honor to be asked to speak. And I was actually going to start by thanking Leslie for bringing disability to the picture, but what's the point? He's gone. Maybe you'll pass it on to him. No, seriously, I'm very grateful to Leslie for continually raising the profile of disability and raising it as an issue that needs to be considered in any discussions of human rights and of democracy. So it really is a great honor to be able to speak tonight. And the series that we are in is Taking Stock, Disability and Human Rights in Contemporary South Africa. As Leslie pointed out, this is the second in the series, and the first one dealt with the Esidimeni tragedy. And the series that we're having now then, of course, accompanies the Deadly Medicine exhibition that examines the implication of the Nazi regime's science of race for medical ethics and social responsibility today. So it seems entirely appropriate within that kind of context of the exhibition that we turn our gaze toward disability as a phenomenon which becomes known in certain ways through the exercise of disciplinary power that is housed within the practices of medicine, rehabilitation and psychology, amongst others, and which often does turn out to be deadly, as in the cases of Nazi Germany and the Esidimeni tragedy. Interestingly, the exhibition also tells us that the science of euthanasia that was developed on infants and children born with physical and mental disabilities provided a basis of gathering experience for staff and techniques for extermination, which were used ultimately in the gassing installations in the larger concentration camps. This vividly illustrates then how the abuse of disabled people foreshadows wider and ongoing abuse. Personally, looking at the Deadly Medicine exhibition, amongst all the shocking images, the one that got to me was there were pictures of two babies with Down syndrome who were victims of experimentation designed for the Eugenic Project. As a mother of 3 children, the youngest of whom has Down syndrome, it was these photos that struck me most deeply and personally and made me think about what does it actually mean to be a person, what value does life hold. In both Nazi Germany and in the loss of 144 lives in the Esidimeni tragedy, it becomes apparent that some forms of human life are subject to consideration and subordination to higher priorities,
such as cost saving, as seems was an estimate, we'll never really know the truth of that, or the development of a pure, strong Aryan race. People with disabilities are objectified as problems to be dealt with in these cases, or as sources of scientific information. In both cases, they were disposable. I think this consideration provides a lead into our discussion tonight, which takes us beyond the right to life into a discussion of disability, personhood, and participation. So I would like to suggest that we need to move on from a discussion of rights to looking at transformation. What is it that will allow us to transform our approach to disability and to begin to look at things differently? In our previous panel discussion, we debated how such an event as a Stellenbosch tragedy could happen in a democracy like ours, and what is the role that we as citizens and professionals might have in being complicit in such an event, or alternatively blowing the whistle on such a flagrant abuse of human rights. The importance of upholding human rights, a project that is always tested by the extent to which they protect the most vulnerable, was at the core of our response in the last panel. In this sense, we focused largely on issues of equality, and we asked, do citizens with severe to profound psychosocial and intellectual disability receive the same rights as any other South African under the Constitution? In this case, it was a resounding no, and this was actually testified to by Judge Masaneke in his arbitration, where each of the families was awarded R1 million for the violation of their constitutional rights. So the question that I would like to pose this evening as a very small start and seek for a lot of further debate is how can we think of equality in terms of transformation, and perhaps more importantly to think of how transformation can lead to equality, and in the context of disability as elsewhere, even more importantly, equity. How do we get to a situation of equity? I would like to relate this to the Global Strategy for Women's, Children's and Adolescent Health, 2016 to 2013, which is based on the Sustainable Development Goals. And this strategy takes the following approach. I'm going to apply it to people with disabilities, but it's applied to women and children in that context. It's a survive, thrive, transform agenda. So survive by ending preventable deaths of people with disability. To start there, that's actually the beginning point, awful as it is. Thrive by realizing health and rights in all settings for people with disabilities and at ensuring health and well-being. And then finally transform by driving a global people-centered movement for comprehensive change for people with disabilities, health and sustainable development. And the transform agenda feeds into the other agendas, because it depends on how we acknowledge and how we understand disability, how the survive and thrive can be dealt with. So I would like to suggest that in order to transform our understanding of disability, we can begin by sharing a reactive perspective to the architects of Nazi eugenics and the planners of Project Marathon that was behind the Stellenbosch tragedy. These people viewed disability as a problem and a burden, and people with disabilities as those who can be sacrificed for greater good. These destructive ideologies will continue to harm us as long as we allow them to provide the ground rules for our debate. So I would like to turn this argument on its head and listen carefully to those voices who have found inexperiences of disability not a problem but a resource that helps us to live better and to recreate a more compassionate and caring world, not only for those who are considered vulnerable, but for all of us who deny and hide our own vulnerability behind an efficient and economically productive exterior. I don't want to be mistaken as proposing a charity or pity agenda where disabled people become the occasion for others to feel good and blessed through charitable acts. However, I would like to suggest that rights talk, in its need to achieve equality, can be used to normalize values of autonomy, independence, self-determination, and individuality, and in that process, silence the importance of relationships, care, and dependency as significant and pervasive features of our lives, whether we have a disability or not. So two caveats before I go further with this discussion. Firstly, in this particular discussion, I want to focus on severe to profound intellectual disability, and therefore it is different as compared to other forms of disability. in this case, we are referred to, Eva Kittay talks about inevitable dependency. So this is dependency that cannot be addressed by environmental considerations, as can be with many other forms of disability, or can be to a certain extent. I also distinguish intellectual disability from, or within psychosocial disability, to clarify that it is not an illness, and adults with intellectual disability are not the same as children, as was pointed out in the paper written by Charlotte and her colleagues. The services required for people with intellectual disability differ from those with psychosocial or psychiatric disability. And for example, people with intellectual disability may or may not require medication for associated health conditions, and their families are far more instrumental in their lives. They are not necessarily, the role of family is different. So while there's undoubtedly a tension between the needs and rights of a person with intellectual disability and the needs and rights of their family caregivers, this mutual relationship must of necessity receive greater nurturing and support. As in South Africa, as even throughout the developed world, the vast majority of the world, people with intellectual disability remain in family care for the most of their lives. In South Africa, we think it might be probably 98% remain in family care. So I just want to mark out that group that I'm talking about, just so that you can judge the views that are put forward in the light of that. So from that, we can see that care within institutions such as Stellenbosch is a small part of the picture. We do need to ensure that for those who need it, good care is provided in such institutions. But the nature of personhood and justice for people with intellectual disability is only marginally to do with this provision of care. The second caveat in this presentation is that I'm basically trying out a whole lot of ideas, and they're not entirely thought through. So if there's a gap in the logic, or the reason doesn't follow, I'd love to hear from you, and we can maybe talk it out further, and I'd like to develop these ideas further. So in looking at the potential for transformation, I want to look at two approaches that acknowledge the transformative power of care for the vulnerable. The first is the L'Arche movement, which was founded by the Canadian Jean Vanier, and the other is the feminist ethics of care, focusing largely on the work of Eva Kittay. Both of these approaches insist that we learn from disability, and we would ignore its lessons at our own peril. So if to begin with L'Arche, the L'Arche movement, that's L'-A-R-C-H, French for the arc. The L'Arche movement was started by Jean Vanier. He was born in Switzerland, and he served in the British and Canadian Royal Navies as a young man. And then in 1964, through his friendship with a Catholic priest, Thomas Philippe, he became aware of the plight of thousands of people institutionalized with developmental disabilities. And he welcomed two men from institution in, I'm not going to say this, right? Tralleborg, France, in that village. He invited them into his home and went through a process of healing with these people. His work is also Henry Nouwen, I don't know if you know the Wounded Healer, the work of the Wounded Healer, is also a supporter of L'Arche and spent a lot of his time in L'Arche communities. So today, L'Arche is an international organization operating in 147 communities in 35 countries, in over 5 continents. L'Arche communities are bound by their charter, which states its aim as firstly to create communities which welcome people with a mental handicap. We're not going to worry about terminology now, we're all friends, so we know what we're talking about. In this way, L'Arche seeks to respond to the distress of those who are too often rejected and to give them a valid place in society. I'm quoting directly from the charter. Secondly, to reveal the particular gifts of people with a mental handicap who belong to the very heart of their communities and who call others to share their lives. Thirdly, L'Arche knows that it cannot welcome everyone who has a mental handicap. It seeks to offer not a solution, but a sign that a society to be truly human must be founded on welcome and respect for the weak and the downtrodden. Fourthly, to be a sign of hope. Its community is founded on covenant relationships between people of different intellectual capacities, social origin, religion and culture, seek to be signs of unity, faithfulness and reconciliation. So The large homes and programs operate according to a not-for-profit community model, in which people with disabilities and those who assist them live together in homes and apartments, sharing life with one another and building community as responsible adults. Everyone in that community is believed to have the capacity to grow and to mature into adulthood and to make a contribution to society, regardless of the physical or intellectual limitations with which they might be living. This is achieved through relationship building and a stable, life-giving home environment. While the difficulty of developing and maintaining such communities is acknowledged by Vanier himself, who states that L'Arche is impossible, David Riemer, in his 2009 book, Living L'Arche, Stories of Compassion, Love and Disability, presents a qualitative psychological study of how people do navigate the impossibility and find healing of their own vulnerability through relationships of compassionate love within these communities. Through observation and interviews, Riemer describes how caregiver assistants are schooled by core members are people with intellectual disability, in living with difference and rejection with grace and dignity. He states, core members inspire others to embrace suffering and weakness towards a life of character and meaning. They show liberation from shame. Riemer points out the difficulty of understanding this process from a perspective of rights and justice. And I think that's partly why we can think out the box and think transformation. He says that these communities speak a language of compassionate love. This language comes from a particular moral and religious vision in Roman Catholicism. Contemporary scientific research understands morality through democratic principles of justice or consequences of human action. This makes it unlikely that science will easily recognize what is moral about L'Arche and its disabled core members. But perhaps the most striking feature that comes out of Riemer's work, he interviewed L'Arche communities in the USA and Canada, and it is the stated aim of L'Arche, is that individuals recognize themselves as beloved, and in so doing become themselves capable of love. By identifying with and standing in solidarity with the most marginal, we move from a place of shame toward growth and healing through relationships of compassionate love. Both the core members and the assistant caregivers grow as individuals. The disabled core members become the instructors for learning how to live with one's own vulnerability and failures. The rejection and shame that they have faced move towards healing in a situation of belonging and acceptance. Personhood becomes a given that calls upon others to respond to it, and in so doing, understand their own community. I take from this example of L'Arche not a solution, not a blueprint, although certainly a useful example, but rather a sign of hope of transformation, that there are different ways of seeing things, there are different ways of doing things, we need to think more broadly. If healing can take place within communities, and it demonstrates the power of relationships. Second part I'd like to look at, unless you are going to, is feminist ethics of care. So the second avenue for exploring transformation is through an understanding of the feminist ethics of care. Joan Conter, the leading exponent of a political ethics of care, proposes that care be placed at the center of our moral levers. If we consider the values that supported the Nazi eugenic project, we can discern economic productivity, efficiency, conformity, nationalism, hierarchy, some of the essential values. Compare this then to a value system that redistributes care as the most valued social commodity, in such a way that everyone is cared for as and when they need it across the lifespan. All of us need to be cared for, all the children need to be cared for, sick, and that no one is disadvantaged through having to provide this care. So it shouldn't be a woman's responsibility, it should be a shared responsibility. Conter and Flisher define care as a species activity. This is their definition, I'm quoting. That includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. I think that maintain, continue, and repair really says it all. It's not about growth, it's not about building, it's not about developing, but how do we maintain and keep what we have and repair what is broken. This differs considerably from the growth and development discourse of economic productivity and emphasizes maintaining rather than extracting. In this framework, there's a recognition that all of us are dependent on care throughout the lifespan to a greater or lesser degree. Good care depends on relationships, and such relationships need to be nurtured through recognizing the vulnerability and needs of both the one in the caring role and the one who is cared for. Both need to be supported, and both have a responsibility towards each other. Tranta identifies the steps that constitute good care as attentiveness, listening to the need for care, responsibility, arranging for how this care is actually to take place, competence, the person who is taking care needs to have the right skills to be able to do it, and finally response to care. The person that is receiving care needs to be able to comment and needs to be able to be listened to in expressing whether that care actually meets their needs. So this notion that all are in need of care allows us to think a little bit differently about intellectual disability. And Eva Kitay guides us through this reflection. She outlines how all individuals are depending on each other in even the most mundane ways, reproduction, transport, etc., and whatever it takes to allow us to complete our task of the day. While some dependencies may be hidden, as for example a business executive who relies on their partner to maintain his or her home. It doesn't look like they're dependent, but they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing if they didn't have that behind them. And others are hyper-visible, such as those arising from disability and poverty. So Kitay outlines how the disability rights movement in its quest for individual rights has had the unintended consequence of excluding advocacy for those who cannot speak for themselves. And she states, those who cannot speak must depend on others to speak for them. Those who can speak find that their voice is given no authority. Perhaps there's no more disabling, disabled not. She therefore proposes a different kind of advocacy, in which advocates must seek conditions that are just to the caregiver, as well as conducive to good care and justice for the one being cared for. There can be no good care if the caregiver is not looked after. To advocate for caregivers is to insist that significant resources be set aside to pay for the services of caregivers and to give them the respect that is due for the work that they do. The focus on care as a transformative potential is it requires us to acknowledge that we all need care, that caregivers need to be cared for. And if you think about it, that's something that was completely absent in the Stellenbosch tragedy. The NGOs that were offering care were just as much abused as any of the charges that they were looking after. And good care depends on relationships built on the attention to a person's needs, taking responsibility for these needs, providing the care, and responding to the care, as I just mentioned, Tranta's steps. So who are these caregivers? Well, we have the family caregivers. Kitay distinguishes between family caregivers and paid caregivers. And both are made derivatively dependent by their caregiver. In families, there's the issue of not being able to be economically productive because of the need to care for I'm talking here about the person with profound intellectual disability and inevitable dependency. And even in paid caregivers are also vulnerable because they tend to be very poorly paid and are subject to various power relationships that can be very awkward. So finally, just families struggle with minimal support, and we've seen even in the Stellenbosch tragedy that families being accused of not caring for their family members, and it seems to be more a lack of understanding of family struggles. I had one who said to me in previous research, it was not that I did not love my child, it's just that I did not know what to do. Families need support and respect. They are the bedrock for people with intellectual disability. And in terms of paid caregivers, we need to look at a situation of training, of decent pay, of respect, of avoiding burnout. These caregivers need to be paid a living wage, be properly trained and respected for the work that they do. So, in conclusion, I've argued that we need not be confined by discourses of contempt that we find in the eugenics and the Stellenbosch examples in discussing personhood and participation. We need to look at discourses of hope that recognize care as a central element of what it means to be human and therefore to embrace it. I've offered the L'Arche movement and a feminist ethics of care as ways of nurturing hope. I recognize that I've been talking on the basis of inevitable dependency, which is not the case with all other impairments, and I look forward to hearing more from my colleagues on their disability. panel here can remind us that disability is not a homogeneous concept. It should not be, as Douglas Butler says, should not be seen as something static, something to be held in the form, not complex, not shifting in meaning. It is all of those things. It's a complex phenomenon, experienced differently at an intersection of multiple identities. Thank you.
Wow, thanks. I mean, we could stop now and have a discussion, so we can discharge our next speakers, but we're not going to. Thank you, really, for getting us so well started. Our next speaker, I'm going to do these things are going to disappear and I'm really delighted to welcome, I think for the first time to our department, we have tried to get you here before, and thank you to your mum for coming, to Kaylee Mycroft, who is probably the most famous of all our speakers tonight. Kaylee is a very internationally known disability rights activist who's currently doing a PhD in human rights law. Is that correct, Kaylee? Almost. At UCT, she's won numerous international awards, including the equivalent of the youth equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize. What's there you go. And we're really delighted to have you here. We're going to start with a very short video, and then Kaylee will talk.
People love to tell me what I can't do, and every time they do, I prove them wrong. Can't dance, can't face straight, can't climb a mountain. Now, how much do you want to bet that I can't like this? Come on, bet me I can't.
If I can have a mic, then.
Yeah. Yep.
Hi. So I think that the purpose of playing that video was to give a slight insight into my kind of approach to life. I'm very much motivated by people that tell me that I can't do things. So that's good. I think I want to start off by just for transparency. I'm almost doing my PhD. I'm just having a slight struggle in submitting my master's. Finishing my master's. I hope there are postgrad people here who can understand the it's real, you guys. So I label myself as an ability activist. And I think that is very much parallel to a disability rights activist, but for me, language is important, right? And so the way that I speak about myself as an ability activist is because, not because I'm denying my disability, because, let's be honest, I'm very clearly a disabled person. So I think it's about recognizing the ability that disabled people have, and that being the focus, rather than having the limitations be the focus. And I think I've been raised in that way it's about not living a life based on limitation of what people have told us we can't do, rather living a life that's focused on how are we going to make that happen. And we decide that that's what we want to do, and we make a plan. I think that's a very solid workhorse, I think. It's worked out for me so far, I think. Something that I am very passionate about as a person is, and as an activist, obviously, is self-determination and autonomy. I think it's something that disabled people don't always have access to. And I think that's been very clear in things like the Islamini tragedy and looking at the exhibition. There it is. Looking at the exhibition, one thing that was not present there was self-determination and autonomy. And I think that's something that we as a world community have acknowledged is not okay for people to not have autonomy over themselves and over what they do. But for some reason this has not been acknowledged for disabled people. We're still sitting in that position where there's a hierarchy of person and disabled people are not near the top. Even in when we have government departments that get dismantled, but they did exist, was women, children, and then disabled people. And I think it's very pedantic, but it's important to recognize that and to challenge that and to think about how we position ourselves to change that. But I feel here a very self-determined and autonomous human being. But I don't think that just happens out of nowhere. I think you need to be raised into being a self-determined person and getting opportunities to make decisions for yourself. So I've been lucky enough to have parents who have told me no as well, because it's a balance, right? You can't just get everything that you want, otherwise you turn into a bit of an ass. And we don't need inconsiderate disabled people. I think I was raised raised as an equal to my sibling. I had very different needs to what my able-bodied sibling has, but she also has needs, and sometimes my needs were less important than hers, and I had to wait. And that's important, that's how families work. That's the give and take of life. And I don't think that disabled people should be excluded from that, just because we have additional needs that sometimes take a lot more effort. So where we get this attitude from, I think, is obviously from parents. And my mom always says that resilient parents grow resilient children. And I think that's a solid pat on her own back. I'm going to give it to her, because I think she's raised pretty resilient kids, so it's okay. But where we also nurture this attitude of I can do it for myself is in the medical profession. Medical profession was given a lot of authority to tell us how we can do things. And it's often the way of doctors and therapists to give worst case scenarios, which are not really that helpful to living a full life. And it's not really in that line of, I can do it, let's make a plan. That's more in that direction of, well, this is what your disability is, so we're going to build your life in this realm. And I don't like living in that realm because it's boring. And it's already taken. So I want to do things that people don't expect me to do because I'm a disabled person, and change the perceptions that way. Because it's a lot easier to grow the group that you surround yourself with as positive people who believe in what I can do and go with me on these ridiculous ideas of riding a horse for 5 days. I don't know, guys. And like climbing mountains and running races and doing things that disabled people are not supposed to do. I build awareness through doing those things. And I've grown to accept that not everyone's going to be cool with it. And I think that's the life of an activist. But that's also the life of a human being. Not everyone's going to like me. And that's okay. I think teachers are very powerful tools in building an attitude of an ability-focused society. Teachers are people that we spend way more time with than most influences in our life. And if they're not positive about our capacity to add value to society, then we're spending the majority of our time with people that don't think we can do things, which is not cool. Sarah, who was my main human with this whole horse challenge, she's trained as a physio, and she went to one of the fellow physios to chat about this whole horse adventure, and she was told, well, that's irresponsible. And if she was my client, I wouldn't allow her to do that. God, I would have thrown some shoes here. Because why is it your right to decide what I want to do? And you're allowing me to have an experience, even if it's a little bit reckless? Like, not reckless. We survived, it was all good. And I think that's the thing, is that we're given different standards for people with disabilities and able-bodied people. Kids with disabilities not allowed to fall ever, because we might hurt ourselves. Guys, seriously, people fall all the time. It's where all the good stories come from. I have some pretty good ones because I was allowed to have those experiences, because they are teaching and learning experiences. So when I fell into the rose garden at home because my friends were irresponsibly pushing me, we learned some lessons that day. Like, maybe we should not allow Jared to push the wheelchair. And like, maybe Katie needs to be strapped in a little bit tighter. And you learn lessons, and that was an experience that we shared. And if I was mollycoddled and not allowed to do anything, I would never have these experiences, and I wouldn't have as good a relationship with those people, because we shared those things. So I sidetracked myself a little bit. My bad. I got it started. So, I think before we talk about what we can achieve, I think we need to talk about what has been achieved. And I tried really hard to think of something that was super tangible that disabled people have gained in the last 10 years. And I'm struggling. But this is why we fight, right? This is why we work, because we need it to be immediate thought, oh, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. But one concrete thing that we do have is the Constitution of our country that speaks about not being able to discriminate against people with disabilities based on the fact that we are disabled. And I'm super happy that that happened because we can then use that and apply it and claim that right to non-discrimination. And being an activist family, we have done that in a very real way. Speaking from my own experiences, I think, I don't know how many people here know, but I've done 2 comrades marathons, and oh, it's ridiculous. So good. I'm like epic but ridiculous. Fellow runners will understand. But 2 years ago, we entered, and there were different approaches to changing the system. So you get people who ask for things, and you get people that do things and then ask for forgiveness. I'll let you figure out which one of those I am. So, granted, like we entered the race not really reading the rules, because who really reads the rules? So we didn't read them, and then we entered, and we paid, and we got all our registration stuff, and then my running partner James was like, hey, did you read the rules? And I was like, why? And it said in the rules, no wheelchairs nor mechanical aids permitted. So there was no mention of me as a person, just first of all. And which is problematic because now we're entered, so now we're committed to this thing. And so here we go. We went, we argued, they said no, and we were like, but yes. And eventually, begrudgingly, they allowed us to do the race. Very, very concerned about the safety of the able-bodied people, thinking that 2 wheelchair athletes are going to vastly affect and injure 18,000 other runners over 89 kilometers, which is in and of itself a lot, but it's okay. So they had rules that they put in place that we were like, no, thank you so much. And we did it, and nobody was hurt. No Katie's were injured in the process of gaining a combat medal. And we completed the race, and we proved them wrong. And then last year we did it again. And last year they had different rules that we were like, no thank you. And last year we had a self-propelled athlete who completed the race with no injuries to other people. This year we have succeeded in Konrad agreeing to have the wheelchair athletes all start in the front of the race, at the start line, which is phenomenal because for some reason a lot of people want disability to be in the dark. So we can include you, we just don't want people to see that we're including you. Because it might cause some drama for us. So people are going to actually push back. The disabled people exist in a realm of pushback. So you have to be a resilient person to be a disabled person. Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to do anything, which I think is really, really problematic in and of itself. But we were only able to achieve that because we had the Constitution in place. And we can be like, but hold on, constitutional supremacy is a thing. Let's just go back to assert ourselves. And that was really cool that we got to achieve that. And that's a tangible thing, and I'm excited about that because now I get to go to the combats and just be a runner. I don't need to be an activist. I can just participate and compete without it being a fight. And that's something that I think is underestimated, is that it's the little things. It's when you don't notice inclusion that inclusion is working. We need to write that down. But seriously, like, that is the way, because if we can have a wheelchair user and a blind person with a guide dog, nobody cares. Nobody knows about the dog snoring or making noise or like. That would be amazing. I also have a service dog, just so you know, I'm a little bit like I'm in the circle. So I know some things. And then thinking about what can be achieved, we can achieve whatever we want. I think that's the thing, that we can't speak about that question in a limiting way. Even asking that question is placing limits on it because we're thinking that we can't achieve everything. So I'm just putting that out there. And then, where do we need to go? I think this is a huge thing to talk about. But I think one thing that we need to stop, but I think this is also an able-bodied problem, and I think it's very good coming from a disabled person, which is good with me, right? Is that disabled people need to stop being inspiration porn. Because it's cool that I inspired you today, because my life is way worse than yours, apparently. Like, thanks for that. I think that's the problem, is that people don't realize that you saying that to me is actually really, really offensive. Because you're saying, oh, well, my life could be worse. Stop it. And when you think it, stop it. Like, stop it from coming to your lips. Because I think that process doesn't happen enough with all of us. So that's the problem. We need disabled people. For me, I don't want to inspire people. I think that's stupid. I want to motivate people. I don't want to inspire you and have you cry for 2 minutes and then move on. I want you to look at my life and say, oh, look what she's doing. I can do that. Or I can do this based on my circumstances. And that's, for me, it's about motivation, it's about action. It's not about me sitting here and being a pillar for pity. Because that's not moving us anywhere. It's probably moving us backwards. rather than where we want to go, which is forward, onward march. So I think a lot of movements, in closing, a lot of movements talk about allies, and you need to be an ally to the vulnerable people, or the people fighting the cause. If it's not your cause, be an ally. And that's cool. And I'm on board with that, but I had this friend in varsity, and she was like, no guys, we don't need allies, we need accomplices. And I looked at her, and I was like, yes girl. And that was everything, because accomplices are people who are in it with you, and they're like the getaway drivers. We need more people who are accomplices to the disability rights cause, rather than just allies sitting on the sidelines waiting for all the disabled people to speak for themselves. And yes, we need to speak for ourselves, but we also need to be backed, because disabled people are a very vulnerable minority, and we need the majority to back us and be accomplices. So, I'm excited to be an accomplice with you. Thank you.
Sit over there. Great. I'm just going to move over this.
I quite like the idea of being an accomplice, I must say. Thanks so much. Lots to think about. Our next speaker is somebody who's really important to the Stellenbosch University community. Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung is the Smarties, which is the Disabled Students Society here, and he's fighting the good fight with some accomplices, I hope, on our campus. So over to you, Konrad. You're going to do it.
A very good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone still awake. I think I'm the sort of lucky one out of all the speakers here, not to have any kind of structure or any sort of like prescriptions to stick to the script. Yeah, so I think I'm just here to simply offer a perspective and not necessarily prescribe subsequent solutions, which is it's a good burden not to have to carry. So yeah, for myself, it's being a disabled student at Stellenbosch University, a personal perspective. So it's personal. Unfortunately, you can't judge it. Anyway, so yeah, excuse me, I titled it, Does Democracy Discriminate Against the Disabled? And I remember I was sort of like reading this back to a friend of mine, and he was like, it's not a rap song. But it still appealed to me, so I was like, I think I'm gonna stick to it. So just let's just ride along, right? And so yeah, that's also part of the myself giving me the freedom to just rock on with it. And also I'm also thankful to just get a platform to just basically just rant and rave about my life for rocking the road plane. So I'll start with I think it was mentioned a couple of times during the last seminar that we had, which was the understanding of you can judge a nation by the way it treats its most vulnerable citizens, right? Now, this is a quote that has been credited to a variety of prominent historic figures, such as Aristotle and Mahatma Gandhi. However, just to put it in the South African context, it was actually used by former President Thabo Mbeki when one of the I think one of the white papers leading up to his well, during his presidency rather. So when he wrote that among the yardsticks by which to measure society's respect for human rights is to evaluate the level of its maturity and its generosity of spirit by looking at the status that it accords to those members of society who are most vulnerable, amongst those which are the disabled, senior citizens, and its children, right? So this vignette was written with only 3 years into our democracy, relating to the importance of addressing the inequalities in physical abilities among South African citizens. We are much deeper into our democracy now today, and it has been hailed as a system that should be somehow celebrated by an involved public in its broadest entirety. So with that, it has brought civil liberties that have sort of improved self-expression and stimulated desires amongst minorities to get involved, but most importantly, participate in the decisions that affect their lives. So active citizenship is something we all should embrace or strive to reach out for. But what we do need to note is such a form of agency is not exactly a given to everyone who has the will to do it. And as already stated by my previous speaker, self-determination and autonomy is severely biased and is not exactly always a given, right? So if, for instance, if we were to ask who would be against democracy as a system of rule, it's unlikely anyone would object, or at least, with the world as we know it, with this, as South Africans. However, as members of minority communities, in terms of representation and at least structurally, a utilitarian system of that nature in terms of social living, in one way or another, it's going to be discriminatory, right, to the so-called vulnerable citizens, the very same, community that we would like to claim that the system should be actually protected. So while by no means I'm saying democracy is an oppressive system, like perhaps we could refer to the system that was in place during Nazi Germany, but depending on which group you fall into, it might not exactly be the rescue tool that that disabled community can rely on for protection or some kind of reliable solidarity, if I may put it like that. So, as someone who is and I think I'm going to sort of go back to that point when I relate other personal stories, or rather a story. So, excuse me, as a product of the special school environment whereby children with disabilities were schooling, I can fully identify with the challenges that come with making the transition from school environment to tertiary, because there I never necessarily felt as the odd one out, because everyone there has some kind of disability. In fact, feeling sorry for yourself is the most uncool thing you could do, and you will find the most I'll just use the word vulnerable in because we've sort of been writing with that in a sense that they are amputated, they don't have any limbs, right? But they appear to be the ones talking the most shit to be honest. So this is someone who can actually get it beat down and he would not be able to defend himself. but he's got so many friends around him because he's the funniest, he's the liveliest, he's basically the life of the party. So try, beating all the other people that are around him, and then you'll be able to. So yeah, basically just looking at a bunch of wheelchairs, in front of him or whatever, and then basically fight off that, and then you get to it. So that for me was sort of a bit of a wake-up call to say they're not necessarily the light of the society, in a sense that we can look to them for all solutions, but that gives you a bit of an idea of how a system that is not perfect, to have children with disabilities in sort of like a gated community like that. But it also gives you an insight into thinking that, okay, at some point, at least this person will have a life after this, and hopefully they'll be able to embrace it, as individuals, as terrifying as that might sound. Because I think, well, especially for myself, I started at pre-primary right up to grade 9. And then from grade 9, I had to go to another special school, which was also a boarding facility right up to matric. So I would say I've lived in a boarding facility right throughout my education sort of period. So one, at some point does think, okay, I'm going to have to integrate now, and how easy they're going to be, or how difficult they're going to be, So, yeah, that for me is still, something I have to think about, especially when we think of ideas of how can we get the education system to sort of maneuver around the kids with the disabilities instead of the kids themselves. It's like the social model around the medical model, if I can put it like that. So, anyway, and then I just want to perhaps go back to that point of going on to the next level of tertiary. We don't really have special tertiary institutions, right? So one way or another, if you have the ambition and at least the capability or the drive to want to come to tertiary, it means you're the one who's going to integrate somehow. But the reality is, this can just simply be too high of a jump. No pun intended for kids for kids with disabilities in that sense. Due to a variety of reasons, it might be financial, just like any other student, or the actual management of the disability itself. So I wanted to also touch on the idea of the universities as the results or the outcomes of our sort of like political, system, where we are sort of like looking up to or into the legal system to sort of, protect these, so-called vulnerable societies, right? And I had a bit of a sad, if I may, say it like that, experience of attending a talk, almost just like this one, whereby the discussion at hand was about the bland sort of like discourse that is ongoing at the moment. So one of I think he's an EFF lawyer who has written a book, The Land is Ours. So upon my arrival at the venue, I see that, we are sort of, there's a group of people going towards a certain direction. So I'm thinking, okay, that's probably where the seminar is being held. So upon getting to the door or the main entrance, I see that there is a flight of stairs going up and into that room. So I inquire that, okay, is there a way of working around this issue. And my sort of like the answer was, yes, we do have a lift. However, it does not reach the particular room where this discussion is being held, right? So my follow-up question is, how come? And the resounding answer was, it's the room is a monument or has some kind of heritage or some kind of value of that nature, right? So that on its own, like I'm trying to manage my own emotions at the time now, but I'm thinking if one of these coordinators were to go up to this room and say, we have just realized that there is an audience member who wants to be part of this discussion, but for some, because of the stairs, we would like to actually move it to another room. And I don't think any audience member would have objected to it, just like if Leslie said the same thing to you, right? But the sad thing is, they went up and just simply carried on. So it was just business as usual. So, and if I may maybe name and shame the faculty, the law faculty, right? So in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, these are gatekeepers of, at least we'd like to think of promoting, human rights protection and all those values that we like to, attribute to our constitution, right? So I am still very much in conflict about that, and going forward, it's one of those things. Excuse me. That as a student, number one, it's very hard to let go of, because you are thinking it could happen to someone else, and that would just simply not be right. But also, as a head of a student organization that is actually mandated to deal with those things, it's just one of those giant David versus Goliath, if you like to look at it, but it just has to be done. So I don't know, maybe one of the days I'll be able to update you on what happened. But I think we're gonna see some success. Anyway, so just on that point, I think what happens when we don't get the numbers on our side in terms of the progression of school children, from normal schooling to tertiary, and being actually able to study what they would like, might be engineering, might be law, whatever. But what happens is there is what I like to call a brain drain-like quandary, where if at least we have people in engineering, law, accounting, whatever, with the sort of thinking that aims to address the matters at hand for the community, we end up losing as a group, and unless this is addressed as urgent as possible, we just remain at one point. So yeah, I think I'll leave it here for now. Thanks.
Bogati's talking about didn't happen many years ago. I feel ashamed as part of this university community about that. I've just found a good use for the Encyclopedia of Disability. It's going to there are 3 volumes, and Brian Waterman is going to put his at last. Brian Waterman is going to put his laptop on there. I'm delighted to welcome Brian back to the department. He was associated with our department for a very long time. But then, as May West said, I was Snow White, then I drifted. He left us for UCT. I hope you're happy there. It's really nice to have you back here. And Brian is really one of the foremost thinkers in the field of psychosocial disability studies, not only in this country, but globally, no pressure. And we're going to hear a bit from Brian about disability in the academy. So,
Hi everybody, it's lovely to be here. What a tough set of acts to follow. Goodness gracious. I've also been told by Leslie that time is, I think it's timekeeping, it's left something to be desired. You know, disability, everyone's boundaries start going haywire. So I'm going to try and be brief. What I have to say, can you hear me all right if I talk a little bit? Yeah. All right. So what I've been asked to talk about is disability, inclusion, and the role of universities. You know, what are universities doing and what ought we to be doing? The short answer is very little / not enough. We could probably go home. But I'm going to try and give a bit more detail than that. There were two big sets of questions, or two big sort of areas of intervention that we need to think about. The first is the broad question of the inclusion of what I would call disability consciousness across all disciplines and curricula in not only our universities, you know, but in all organizations. But speaking particularly about universities, you know, the disability, transforming a society is not just about specialist disability knowledge, and we all know this. You know, it's about including the disability dimension as a central concern in how we think about organizations or structure. In the case of universities, it's about including disability consciousness in every discipline, you know, because what are we doing as universities? We're creating citizens, you know, professionals of all sorts. We are ostensibly giving people skills with which to go out there and create a society which we hope will be less harmful than our parents' one, or than our own one. And in order to do that, all sorts of professionals need to be thinking about how disability features in what it is that they do. That's bringing disability home to a place where we begin to see it, and I don't feel that universities have really come anywhere near this, or as a society where we begin to see disability not as a sort of an add-on, but as the human universal, which all of my colleagues have sort of gestured to it be, to begin to realize that, sorry, I'm struggling to see. Oh yes. To begin to realize that it's disability that in fact unites us rather than creates a sort of an artificial set of add-ons that we, in some sort of benevolent or politically correct action, allow to be included in our system, in our organization, in our society. This kind of repositioning of disability is, for me, it must involve a personal process which is a kind of a humbling process. And I think it came up very much in what Julie was saying about large communities. And when I say humbling, I mean a humbling of the best sort, where I'm talking about a movement. Sorry, I'm struggling. Oh, okay. A humbling of the best sort, which involves using disability, and I don't mind the idea of using disability, as an antidote to the narcissisms of modernity that sweep up our lives, that seduce us so completely and take all of us very far away from what is common about our humanity and also what is important and fundamental to our own individual existence. And again, what Judy was saying really feels like it speaks directly to that, you know, where the L'Arche community is trying to create a situation in which non-disabled people come to a place of disability as the place where humanness exists, rather than the other way around. This is all very, very nice to talk about. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I know how to achieve it. In some ways, I guess I'm just trying to describe how colossal the task is, because it's a personal task, as well as an organizational and a material task of transforming people, real people, not just buildings and systems and so on, important as those things are. And this is a movement towards, as I say, real diversity, real inclusion, which is not about sort of a mainstream of normals onto which we add and make provision for a set of outliers. So that's some probably quite unhelpful remarks about the big picture of university transformation, organizational transformation. And I'm going to be a little bit more specific. The second concern of the two that I named in the beginning, and that's speaking a bit more directly to the concerns of this exhibition, the Deadly Medicine exhibition. And that relates to the question of how it is that we are training health professionals. Because as universities, this is a massive task, I feel, which lies in front of us as we, through the training of health professionals, through the shaping of healthcare practice, are in a position of really being a linchpin about changing, creating disability discourse across society. And I don't think that's an overstatement. What sort of health professionals are we training? How do they think about things like quality of life? You know, the question of what lives are worth living, and so on. And we know that you know, what we saw in the exhibition is the recognition by some that some lives were not worth living. At the heart of genocide is an extreme version of the heart of, I'm talking particularly about all genocide, but I think particularly about the genocide of disabled people, as you all saw today. At the heart of genocide is an extreme version of an everyday situation which exists in the lives of disabled people. And it's been mentioned already this afternoon, and that is quite simply the idea of disabled people being seen as problems. Problems which can be responded to in various ways. You can obliterate a problem, and via genocide you can solve a problem, and you can manage a problem. You can solve a problem by institutionalization. You can manage a problem by managing disabled people in various ways. But in any one of those three options, the reality of being experienced and experiencing oneself as a problem remains. Even after the Asedameni tragedy, and with all of the media fallout that we had and that hung over the Gauteng administration as well as the Ministry of Health, our Health Minister, Aaron Motsvaledi, who's a person for whom I have an enormous amount of respect, who was describing how the sort of reparative interventions that were being done in order to, amongst other things, move residents from unaccredited environments to safer environments, he spoke about how these patients were going to be moved in batches. Now, everyone here who knows me will know that I am not a stickler for political correctness or obsessive compulsive about language. But what do we know about a batch? A batch is something which is made up, firstly, of inanimate objects. And secondly, it's made up of objects that are all the same. Like biscuits, for example. We make a batch of biscuits. The fact that no testimony was included of the actual residents, people with intellectual disability and psychosocial disabilities who are involved in this epidemic tragedy, the fact that none of their testimony was included in the arbitration, for me, underlined their batchness, which is the assumption that these people, perhaps with optional quotes, have either no voice, or if they have a voice, their voices will all be the same. So, how are we training health professionals? Are we training health professionals to treat disabled people as problems? I'm afraid, I think the short answer is yes, we are. We have been for a long time, and I think we continue to do that. If we look at the philosophical underpinnings of biomedicine, you will find that within that tradition, that very hegemonic tradition, it's not just disabled people, but infirm people of all sorts who are constructed as problems which require a solution. As disabled people presenting that most awkward problem where a solution is not readily apparent, at least to the problems as they are constructed by the medical gaze. But that's another issue. I want to say as an aside at this point, and also people who know me will be familiar with my back going on about this, is that I take issue with the stereotyping of health professionals very strongly, or what is sometimes called doctor bashing, where, as I'm sure many of you know, the disability movement around the world has, I think, made itself, and disability studies as a discipline, has made itself guilty of stereotyping doctors and constructing them, or health professionals of all sorts, and constructing them as the sort of uber perpetrators, for want of a less ironic term of phrase, who are the oppressors of disabled people, who oppress disabled people with diagnoses and with the alienation of medicalizing construction and so on and so on, in a way which, well, the stereotype is a stereotype, and in a way which carries with it hatred. I don't feel that way at all, and I would like to present to you a sort of an opposite view, if anything, where I would argue, along with Judy and Eva Kitay and Joan Toronto, that I would argue for a position which views health professionals with a deep compassion, one which has been a long time coming. Why do I say that? Well, health professionals, and there's enormous evidence for this from around the world, are schooled in environments which tend towards the authoritarian, which are extremely hierarchical in nature, institutional in nature, and in which trainees, often from a very young age, are exposed, certainly in South Africa, to large amounts of trauma. This comes along with immense levels of responsibility, also from early on, as well as within that authoritarian and hierarchical organizational structure, a pattern of overwork and sleep deprivation. This is how we forge our health professionals. Along with this, there is little or no emotional support provided, and in certain instances, again, which is, I think, can demonstrate with research evidence, there is a culture which actively discourages the exploration or contemplation of emotional responses to the work. And creating health professionals in this way, in what are often their formative years as people, let alone as health professionals, can create a situation in which the necessary and often rigid psychological defenses which need to be employed in order to manage the situation become cemented by the trauma which is associated with the experience. And that's not a difficult thing to understand. If you are created in a way which requires you to deal with very difficult circumstances without support and care, without a place for those circumstances to be digested, you will need to cope with them, if you like, in quite psychologically crude ways. Add to that, all of the above, that health professionals have the injunction to cure and to correct. That is what they have to do. I'd agree with people in the audience who said this is a rather simplistic picture, and I am overstating it and perhaps making it sound a little bit unidimensional, which it's not. But I do believe that there's something here of the bare essence of what underpins institutional healthcare as we know it, and what continues to tie it together, and what continues to cause suffering to professionals who we then need, particularly in relation to disabled people and others, to be people who have the internal capacity to think in the complex ways about issues of care and containment that Judy and Eva Kitse have been talking about. It's not realistic, I don't think. In this frame, it's very hard, from the resultant vantage point, it's very, very difficult, I believe, for health professionals to see disability and disabled people as anything other than aberrations. As anything other than a sort of excess, to quote Erica Berman, an excess that will not fit, kind of an overflow, an insoluble problem for which there's not an evident way of managing, an evident way of digesting the situation. What this creates is a situation where medical professionals develop what I would call a medicalization defense over these early years, which, I mean, very briefly has three aspects to it. It involves a degree of victim blaming, where seeing suffering in the other and not being able to prevent it, not being able to alter it, results in the only choice being to blame the victim for his or her painful circumstances or distress. Along with that, a denial of the complexity of social injustice, which is born of health trainings which do very little to give our health professionals skills about understanding how societies work and how they work to maintain inequality. And lastly, a fantasy of the homogeneousness of embodiment. In other words, an idea that people's embodiment is not something which is complex and unique, individual, and has its own story and its own ways of life, but something which can be categorized diagnostically. There's evidence, and it's quite convincing evidence, from a couple of parts of the world that through the course of medical training, young health professionals' disableist attitudes are actually worsened, along with the fact that through the course of training as health professionals, expectations of the possible life potentials of disabled people actually decrease. We should be really taking note of that, I think, very, very carefully. Let me have a time.
2 minutes.
Okay. I'll say two more things.
1 minute.
Okay. For disabled people, actually going to go. Okay, for disabling with in the lives of disabled people, engaging with health professionals, therefore, can also represent a sort of an extreme case of an everyday difficulty. And what I'm talking about here is the fact that in the worlds which disabled people inhabit, they are worlds which I would argue are populated with relentless experiences of misattunement. In other words, experiences of bumping up against an environment which was not prepared for you and does not mirror your embodiment, your experience, or yourself in any meaningful way. Everybody needs this. I'm sure I don't have to convince you of that. You know, we all need to see ourselves in the world around us and to be responded to by others, by the society in which we live, in a way which gives us some sort of sense that there's a recognition of our inner experience, a recognition of who we are, that this place was prepared for me, that someone here sees me and understands something of my struggle. For disabled people tend to inhabit worlds in which there's a constant collision with environments that say no. You were not prepared for in this place. You were not thought about. Your embodiment was not considered in the way in which these processes were structured, or the way in which we do things that we do here, or the way in which the amenities or services which happen here were put together. It's a very short existential step from experiencing all of that in a relentless way to moving to a place of feeling at a deep level that I don't belong here, I don't have a place here. It's a constant experience in the lives of disabled people. What my concern is that we create health professionals who find themselves in extremely authoritative positions, because it's been said earlier today, health professionals do have enormous positions of authority. For example, being the people around whom young, disabled people in their formative years may have relationships which span years of their young lives. And because of that, they are in exceptionally influential positions in terms of creating the meanings of embodiment. And I just think about that for a moment, creating the meanings of embodiment. In other words, what does the nature of my embodiment, whatever that might be, in my case, it's sight impairment along with a lot else about how I'm put together. The medical encounter is a place where the meanings of embodiment are created and disseminated in very, very powerful ways. If in that place there's a further experience of this influential figure confirming that the world doesn't have a place for me, and that however I'm put together is a way which is not going to fit, which is not going to be able to interact in any sort of useful way with the way that the world is constructed out there, there's an awful long way to come back for that disabled individual to find a place, as Katie describes so aptly, find a place to be and a place to do, and a place to be part of living in society in a way which has a degree of power, of autonomy, of personal power, of self-direction, or real participation. I had more to say, but I'm going to stop there.
Thanks so much, Brian. I think I'll be absolutely appalling at time keeping, but I think I'm going to ask, can our panelists each just come up to the front, and we'll take one very quick round of questions and some final comments. My apologies for my... Brian, you said what did I do to the boundaries or something?
Disability much worse.
We've got... Okay, time for 3 quick comments or questions, I'm sorry to know that people have lives, believe it or not. But I think you'll agree with me that it's been worth, actually, I didn't want to stop people from talking because the talks have been so amazing. So, any questions or comments from the floor? One, two is fine.
Thanks. I'm a former politician. I'll try very hard just to be very concrete, but it's a challenge. But no, I just wanted to say I nearly didn't come today, and I'm so glad I did. Apart from seeing Kylie and her mom again, which was amazing, but hearing what they were saying and the message that was coming out, I suddenly became aware, for the first time in my life, to what extent there is an active dehumanization of people with disability. I go away here with that message to my own shame. And just anecdotally, I was under President Mbeki. I was Deputy Minister of Health for 2 years. Never once, in all my engagement with officials, hospitals, people, never once do I remember the word disability and how it should be dealt with and how it should be managed ever coming to the fore. So what I'm saying is, I just wish this message could be multiplied so fantastically, because there was so much, there were so many different ways that it came across, but it is absolutely amazing, and the challenge is just out there. I think is what it happens. I'm a commissioner for the Commission for Cultural Religion and Language, and one of our big objectives is social cohesion, but what we miss is how can we don't even achieve social cohesion with people who do not have a disability. So what's happening from everybody else who is very so much part of the same grouping in our cultural life. So yeah, thanks so much, guys. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. I think Zara?
Yeah, but also thanks to all the speakers, so interesting.
We do need to know.
No, just also thank you. I work at the department that Leslie's daughter works in. And
I didn't tell her to say that.
No, just, so I've got a background in social science, but now work in public health, and just kind of 2 weeks ago started to be interested in this space, and it just, my mind's exploding. But two things. One was that we were leading a class today describing how we designed a research project to speak to pregnant women. And one of the people in the lecture, I think because of Leslie's lecture, actually asked about whether or not sign language and deaf women were included in our sample, and whether or not, because there's a lot of conversation about Ireland and languages and how we manage all of that, which is a constant concern for us as qualitative researchers. But you know, that never came into the conversation, similarly, so it's just an observation. Even among people who are, broadly speaking, like, aware of the need for inclusion. And the second thing that I was going to say was just a comment on Gani's story about the rooms. And it just reminded me a little bit of having worked at health sciences for the last 3 years. I saw how the student protests were kind of intersecting with the authorities, and kind of, it strikes me that there was a similar mentality of just like, the second you start to think about how complex dealing with some accommodation might be, it's like this massive iron curtain comes slamming down, and there's a total lack of creativity, and it's just, it's too complicated, it's too expensive, it's too difficult, it's too varied. Whereas actually, like, sometimes for people who, you know, are experiencing this themselves, some of those solutions are not necessarily that complicated. Moving rooms is not that complicated. You don't need to build a whole ramp necessarily. There are other spaces. And similarly with the student protests, you know, there was this iron wall that came down where it was just like, nope, it's impossible to change any of this institutional culture. And actually, some of the things that people were asking for, like having lectures recorded or having an additional examiner in place to kind of double check things, some of those were eminently doable. So I think, yeah, I just also struck by how uncreative and kind of, there's like this level of inertia about change, which actually some of it is not necessarily, not to deny the like, you know, the complexity of a lot of it, but some of it is simple, it seems. So thanks again.
Thank you. lots of things on their hearts that they would like to say, but haven't had time to say. And my apologies for the timekeeping, but as I say, I think I didn't make a decision, but it was the right decision I didn't make. And I would like to encourage, please, all of you to fill in these forms are very important for us to get feedback. I'm well aware of time and people have come a long way, so I'm going to close, but I know that many of you will want to engage maybe informally with our speakers. You can see why I asked for these people to come and talk. It's been an amazing evening for me, just the kind of right mix of all sorts of things. So thank you very much to all of you, and keep fighting the good fight. This is part of what we need to do to make things change. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to the sponsors and to our relationship with the Holocaust and Genocide Center. Without you, this wouldn't have happened, and I'm so glad these two sessions have happened. So, travel safely, everybody, and thank you very much all for being here and for participating. Thank you. Judy wants to make a quick pass. I promised her beforehand.
Just to say that if you want to continue this conversation and come to learn more around disability, we're having a seminar on the 31st of May. Just put a little notice up there, and we'll have and we'll circulate it electronically as well. So it would just be nice. If we haven't had enough tonight, there's more coming. That's what I want to say.
Thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Thank you.